Okay, so we're in the Gemara. This is the Daf Yomi. We're in Avodah Zarah, Daf 41. So we're going to be dealing with different features of a statue and whether or not they are considered an idol. So Rabbah says, the dispute between Rabbi Meir and the rabbis is only with regard to statues that are erected in villages, but with regard to those that are erected in cities, all agree that they are permitted. That it is permitted to derive benefit from them. What is the reason? It is because they were fashioned for ornamental purposes and not for worship. The Gemara asks, but with regard to those erected in villages, is there anyone who says that they are fashioned for ornamental purposes? Those in villages were certainly fashioned for idol worship. How then can the rabbis maintain that such statues are permitted? So the Gemara answers, rather, if such a distinction was stated, this is what was stated. So Rabbah says that the dispute between Rabbi Meir and the rabbis is only with regard to statues that are erected in cities, where they may have been fashioned simply for ornamental purposes. But with regard to those erected in villages, all agree that they are used for idol worship and are therefore forbidden. The Mishnah teaches, and the rabbis say the only statues that are forbidden are any statue that has in its hand a staff, or a bird, or an orb, as these are indications that the statue is designated for idolatry. So the Gemara explains that each of these items symbolizes the statue's supposed divinity, indicating its dominion over the world. A staff symbolizes the dominion as the idol rules itself under the entire world. That is, it rules the entire world, like one who rules over an animal with a staff. So a bird symbolizes dominion as the idol grasps itself under the entire world. That is, it grasps the entire world as one grasps a bird in its hand. An orb symbolizes dominion as, as the idol grasps itself under the entire world. It grasps the entire world as one grasps a ball in his hand. The sages taught in Tosefta 6:1 that they added the following to the list of items that, when added to a statue, indicate that it is worshipped as an idol: a sword in its hand, a crown on its head, and a ring on its finger. So that would include a lot of statues of kings and dignitaries. It actually reminds me, because I had the opportunity to see a piece of a statue of King George, the statue that during the Revolution they basically tore apart, and a guy that I was doing some work with, he was working for an auction house, and he had recovered the hand of that statue. And it's very interesting. It's interesting because of the way that statues are made. And it's interesting, too, because they're empty. A lot of times, statues are empty. And even the statue of the King George, it's a shell that they make. The statue is empty, okay? Even that's such an important statue for the king. But anyway, it was supposedly covered in gold, but the gold was stripped off, and a lot of that material, like the underlying lead of that statue, was used for bullets during the Revolution. But anyway, I wanted to point that out. Statues are typically empty. All right. The Gemara explains why these items were initially believed to be insignificant and were later understood as symbolizing idol worship. With regard to a statue holding a sword, the sages initially thought this merely indicates that it is a statue of a bandit. But in the end, they reasoned that it symbolizes the notion that the idol has the power to kill itself under the world. That is, to kill the entire world. Makes you think of somebody, who. Anyway, with regard to a crown, the sages initially thought that it is merely a woven wreath, but in the end, they reasoned that it is like the crown of a king. So with regard to a ring, the sages initially thought that it was merely symbolizing the bearer of a signet ring, but in the end, they reasoned that it is symbolic of the idol's supposed ability to seal its fate under the whole world, to seal the fate of the entire world for death. The Mishnah teaches that Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel says, it is prohibited to derive benefit even from any statue that has any item whatsoever in its hand. The sages taught in Braita, it is prohibited to derive benefit from a statue even if it is merely holding a stone or even a twig. So Rav Ashi raised a dilemma. If the idol is grasping excrement in its hand, what is the halakha? So is it meant to honor the statue, indicating that it is an object of idol worship? Do we say that the statue is forbidden, as this indicates the entire world is inferior to it like excrement? Or perhaps does this indicate that the idol itself is inferior to the entire world like excrement? The Gemara concludes the question shall stand unresolved. I wonder what brought that up. So in the case of one who finds unidentifiable fragments of statues, these are permitted. That is, one may derive benefit from them. If one found an object in the figure of a hand or the figure of a foot, these are forbidden, as objects similar to those are worshipped. And that would be the case of the hand of King George that was found. So the story is that I think it was a Marine or somebody, a disabled Marine that had a garden, and they found it in the garden because it was like some garden ornament that was there forever. And but anyway, so if that man was a Jew, he would be prohibited from deriving benefit from that recovered piece of the statue. So Shmuel says it is permitted. This is back to the Gemara. Shmuel says it is permitted to derive benefit even from fragments of objects that have been seen used in idol worship. So the Gemara asks, but didn't we learn in the Mishnah that fragments of nondescript statues are permitted? So this indicates that it is prohibited to derive benefit from fragments of idols that were known to be worshipped. The Gemara answers, the Mishnah means that fragments of statues are permitted, and the same is true even of fragments of objects of idol worship. And that which is taught in the Mishnah, fragments of statues, is not meant to exclude fragments of idols. Rather, this expression is used because the Mishnah sought to teach, in the last clause, if one found an object in the figure of a hand or in the figure of a foot, these are forbidden, even if they are not known to be objects of idol worship, as objects similar to those are worshipped. If the first clause in the Mishnah had referred to fragments of idols, it would have been inferred that the latter clause was referring specifically to the figure of a hand or foot that was known to have been worshipped, and that otherwise such figures would not be forbidden. We learned in the Mishnah, if one found an object in the figure of a hand or in the figure of a foot, these are forbidden, as objects similar to those are worshipped. The Gemara asks, why? But aren't they fragments of idols, which are permitted according to Shmuel? So the Gemara answers that Shmuel interpreted the Mishnah as follows. It is referring to a case where these objects that are in the figure of a hand or a foot are standing on their pedestals, which shows that they were designed this way initially and are not merely fragments. It was stated with regard to objects of idol worship that broke by themselves. Rabbi Yochanan says it is prohibited to derive benefit from them, and Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish says it is permitted. The Gemara explains the sides of the dispute. So Rabbi Yochanan says that it is prohibited, as its owner did not revoke its status as an object of idol worship, and Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish says that it is permitted, as the owner presumably revoked its status as an object of idol worship, having said to himself, if the idol could not save even itself from harm, can it save that man, meaning myself? So Rabbi Yochanan raised an objection to Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish. From the passage in the book of Samuel, recounting the downfall of the Philistine god Dagon, and when they arose early the next morning, behold, Dagon was fallen on his face to the ground before the ark of the Lord, and the head of Dagon and both the palms of its hands lay cut off upon the threshold. Only the trunk of Dagon was left to him. 1 Samuel 5:4. And from the next verse, it seems that Dagon's worshippers accorded its honor despite its destruction, as it is written, therefore, the priest of Dagon and anyone who comes into Dagon's house do not tread on the threshold of Dagon in Ashdod until this day. 1 Samuel 5:5. Evidently, when an idol breaks, its worshippers do not stop worshiping it. So Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish said to him, is there a proof from there? There, the reason people did not tread on the threshold of Dagon is that they had abandoned their worship of Dagon and would instead worship the threshold upon which Dagon was found. As they stated this reasoning, the spirit of Dagon has left the Dagon idol, and instead it came and rested upon the threshold. It's like they justify, like when their religion doesn't pan out, right? When that certain person doesn't come back, or whenever this happens or that happens, then they have to modify their religion All right, so Rabbi Yochanan raised another objection to Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish from the Mishnah. In the case of one who finds fragments of statues, these are permitted. This indicates that fragments of known objects of idol worship are forbidden. So Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish replied, "Do not say that the indication is that fragments of objects of idol worship are forbidden. Rather say that the indication is that full statues themselves are forbidden." In the unattributed Mishnah is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Meir, who in the previous Mishnah prohibits any statue as it is possible that it is worshipped annually. So the Gemara asks, but how does Rabbi Yochanan refute the following logic? From the opinion of Rabbi Meir, one can learn a detail with regard to the opinion of the rabbis, meaning the majority. Doesn't Rabbi Meir say that statues are forbidden while fragments of statues are permitted? From this, one can derive that this is true according to the rabbis as well with regard to the objects of idol worship. The object itself is forbidden, but its fragments are permitted. The Gemara rejects this comparison. How can these cases be compared? There, in the case of statues, the fragments are permitted because there is room to say that people worship them, and there's also room to say that people did not worship them. And even if you say that people worship them, there is room to say that their owners subsequently revoked them. So this is not comparable to an object of idol worship, which people certainly worshipped, and who is to say that its owner certainly revoked it? It is a conflict between an uncertainty as to whether or not it was revoked and a certainty that it was worshipped. And the principle is that an uncertainty does not override a certainty. The Gemara asks, and does an uncertainty not override a certainty? But isn't it taught in a Braita in the case of a chaver who died and left a storehouse filled with produce? Even if the produce was there only that day, it has the presumptive status of produce that was ritually prepared, that is properly tithed. This is due to the presumption that the chaver tithed the produce himself or instructed others to do so. So the Gemara infers, and here in this case, the produce was certainly untithed at the outset, and there is uncertainty whether the chaver tithed it, and there is uncertainty whether he did not tithe it. And despite this conflict, the uncertainty whether it was tithed comes and overrides the certainty that it was untithed produce. The Gemara rejects this claim. There, in that case, conflict is between certainty and certainty, as the chaver certainly tithed the produce. This presumption is in accordance with the statement of Rabbi Hanina Choza'ah, as Rabbi Hanina Choza'ah says, there is a presumption with regard to a chaver that he does not release an item from his possession that is not ritually prepared. Okay, and if you wish, say instead that perhaps the produce did not initially have the status of untithed produce, and therefore the conflict is between uncertainty and certainty. So this is because it is possible that there was never an obligation to tithe the produce, as the chaver may have acted in accordance with the statement of Rabbi Oshaya, who says that a person can employ artifice to circumvent obligations incumbent upon him in dealing with his grain, and bring it into his courtyard in its chaff, so that his animal may eat from it. And this grain is exempt from tithes. Although the obligation to tithe produce that has been fully processed applies even to animal fodder, it is permitted to feed one's animal untithed produce that has not been fully processed. In light of this halacha, it is possible that the produce in the storehouse of the chaver never needed to be tithed. Consequently, this case is a conflict between two uncertain factors, as it is uncertain whether or not the owner was obligated to tithe the produce in the first place, and even if he was required to do so, it is uncertain whether or not he tithed it. So the Gemara raises another objection. And is it so that an uncertainty does not override a certainty? But isn't it taught in a Braita that Rabbi Yehuda said, there was an incident involving a maidservant? And that is the end of Daf 41. Thanks for watching.